necessarily those of this station, its staff, management, or sponsors.
Are you a family caregiver? Are you caregiving for someone who can no longer take care of themselves? Are you overwhelmed? This is Caregiver Solutions Info with Marcia Teele. Marcia will be hosting an hour of true stories and information, tips and updates of the latest research and necessary information in the caregiving field, focusing on you, the family caregiver. An Alzheimer's disease and dementia care expert, Marcia has 15 years of hands-on experience at Arden Courts, a leader in assisted living dementia communities here in the U.S. Marcia covers everything you need to know as a family caregiver, especially if you care for a loved one with Alzheimer's disease or other related dementia or chronic illness. If you have a friend or relative that is also a family caregiver, call them now. They won't want to miss a minute. And let them know they can watch on caregiversolutions.info. And they can listen on WNN 1470 AM in South Florida or nationally on the iHeartRadio app. Now, sit back, relax, and learn from our host, Marcia Teele, as she brings information to you that may just be the caregiving solution you need.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Caregiver Solution Info Show. I'm Marcia Teele, and I'm so glad that you could join us today. I have another wonderful program for you. Unfortunately, we're still in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, probably 5.5, 6 months into it at this point. We're all really tired of it. We're trying our best to stay healthy, stay safe. There have been so many industries affected by this pandemic, and it's disrupted so many lives, our daily life. But there's a particular industry that it has hit really hard, and that's the funeral homes. Now, it's really, really tough because this coronavirus, with all the changes that we've had to make, has altered the way that we say the final last goodbye to our loved ones. So today we're going to talk to an expert in that field about how the coronavirus has changed the way that we do the last goodbye and solutions to getting around the new rules. So my guest today, joining me via his home office, is Wayne Henry. And Wayne is the Family Services Manager of Dignity Memorial Southeast Florida. Now, Dignity Memorial has at least 10 locations in Southeast Florida, but Dignity Memorial also has over 2,600 locations throughout the United States, Puerto Rico, and Canada, and they serve all faiths. So there you are, Wayne. Welcome to the Caregiver Solutions Info Show.
Thanks for having me, Marcia.
I'm glad that you are here to talk about this really important topic today, because obviously the dying part is traumatic for everyone involved, the family having to deal with all of that in the midst of the pandemic, and it's especially hard because there's so much going on. So how has this pandemic affected your industry? We actually hear on the national news about some funeral homes that have been overwhelmed with deaths from the COVID-19. Have any of your funeral homes been affected in this way? And if so, how did they manage?
Sure. So, I think we've all been affected in many ways. I don't think, any of our funeral homes have been, inundated by huge numbers of COVID deaths. Miami area, certainly has increased. But we are certainly busier than normal. Part of that is that a lot of the snowbirds never left. They were down here when they would normally, COVID hit, when they would normally go back up north, and no one wanted to go back up, especially in New York when the COVID has hit hard. So they ended up staying down here. So usually in the summer months, our industry is much slower because a lot of the snowbirds have left, or all the snowbirds have left. Where this year we've been very, very busy. So COVID has obviously affected in many ways, and I spoke to several of funeral directors before tonight just so I could have some information. And certainly they're saying all of them have dealt with people who have passed away with from the COVID virus. So it is affecting it that way. But we're also getting the majority of the cases that we're dealing with are non-COVID deaths. So we're dying, people die of lots of different things. COVID is not, overwhelmingly the majority of the causes of death, but it certainly is affecting a lot of the families and the way we operate in many different ways on a daily basis, even if the death is not COVID related. It's slowed things down quite a lot on various levels. So medical examiners are bogged down. So, for example, so if there's many times there's a suspected COVID case. So someone passes away, they never got tested. They're not sure if COVID was the cause or not. The medical examiner is having to, investigate those cases where normally, it's fairly clear cut. The cause, a medical examiner wouldn't be needed for a burial, for example. So that's slowed things down. Also here in Florida, and we have 100 locations, over 100 locations throughout Florida, and over 30 between West Palm and Fort Lauderdale. Other thing is a lot of the families have burial plots up north. So what we're doing through our network quite often is we prearrange, or even if they haven't, we can accommodate helping the family. Someone's passed away here in Florida, but we need to get them up to a northern state to lay them to rest in their cemetery up there. So we work across our network to make that happen. But with COVID restrictions, if someone has COVID or has been in a facility where there was COVID, then there are extra regulations right now that again slow things down. Plus, with the lockdown and everything else, there are so fewer flights right now. So that has added delays as well, I know. But normally, someone's passed away, we could usually, in normal circumstances, maybe, get them on a flight the next day or the day after, go up north, lay them to rest. That often is delayed, by at least a day, if not two. Sometimes even more, depending on the location and what flights are available. And not every airplane is equipped to, transport a casket. So those types of technical things have certainly slowed it down. But saying that, I have spoken to the funeral directors. I spoke to several funeral directors, and they've all said they've all dealt with COVID cases. Some of the funeral homes down in Miami, not necessarily because there's so many more deaths or there's so many more COVID deaths, but that delay. Where normally they would, we could prepare someone for burial, and they're, out in a day or two, is often delayed much longer. So because of that delay, things back up, and for that reasons, yes, we're having to look at, refrigeration trucks on some locations, to hold the bodies until we can get everything processed and get, the caskets on their way. Having to move, caskets between locations in our network, because one is completely full. So yeah, there are some additional challenges there, logistical challenges, to deal with those delays. And like I said, there's more snowbirds here. There's delay there. There's a backup. The processing is taking longer. So it's certainly affecting us in many, many ways. On that end, and then other ways for the families, it's changed things as well. So there was a gentleman where they were living down here. I actually helped with their pre-arrangements last year, and his wife passed away unfortunately, and they have burial plots up in New York. So we took care of that. She was a COVID case. He was in that area. I don't know if he was ever tested himself for COVID, but um, so we warned him that he couldn't, even if he didn't have COVID or wasn't suspected of having COVID. There's now a quarantine, a mandatory 14-day quarantine when you go back up to New York if you're coming from Florida. So we said you're not going to be able to attend your wife's funeral if you fly up to New York. So he kind of ignored us and went up anyway, and tried to kind of get around that, and of course, that wasn't possible. So, that's heartbreaking to think. This poor husband just simply wanted to go to his wife's funeral up in New York, and he wasn't able to do that because of COVID. So it is, quite heartbreaking result.
Yeah, just one example of how this is affecting the family. Yeah.
Yeah.
We're going to take a quick break, Wayne. Go to
Sure.
our commercial break real quick, but this is great. We're going to talk a lot more about this when we return. So stay with us, everybody. We'll be right back.
Arden Courts is not just a place to live, it's a place to call home. Residential living combined with quality caregiving. This is the philosophy behind Arden Courts. Communities created exclusively for individuals with Alzheimer's disease and related dementia who would benefit from a safe and structured environment. For additional information about any of the unique services Arden Courts provides, call 888-478-2410 to locate a community nearest you. Inquire about our educational seminars, resource library, or support groups, or simply feel free to ask questions you may have about Alzheimer's and related dementias. At Arden Courts, we know, we understand, and we can help because memory care is all we do. Remember, call 888-478-2410 for additional information about any of the unique services Arden Courts provides. You are listening to your host, Marcia Teele, an Alzheimer's disease and dementia care expert on caregiversolutions.info. If you have a question or wish to share a story, call into the show at 888-565-1470 and talk with Marcia. Now, back to Caregiver Solutions.
Welcome back to Caregiver Solutions Info Show. My guest today is Mr. Wayne Henry. Wayne is the Family Service Manager with Dignity Memorial, Southeast Florida. Dignity Memorial operates over 2,600 funeral homes throughout the United States, Canada, and Puerto Rico. So we're talking today about how this pandemic has affected not only the way that their industry has had to change the way they do things, and how that is also affecting the families. So Wayne, that being said, with the way you have to change everything, let's talk about the actual situation where the families are here, the loved one is going to be, buried or cremated here, and the families want to do their traditional maybe viewing, maybe a celebration of life service, where everyone gets together and the big, large crowds. Now that's a no-no with social distancing. What's happening? I know a lot of people are wondering about this. If they haven't already experienced it, they're wondering what happens.
Yeah, so we've had to be very creative with, very little notice. But basically, we are able to help families still honor their loved one, still say their final farewells. It's just logistically there are challenges and restrictions there. So if it's important to the family to have a viewing, a funeral service, a celebration of life, a memorial service, we can do all of those still, even with COVID restrictions. To enter any of our facilities, masks are required. And sanitizers are readily available. If there's anyone showing any symptoms of being ill, we're asked to strictly do not enter. Social distancing is there. So roughly we're able to work at about 50% capacity. So depending on the size of the chapel or the room where we're having a service or a viewing, would mean the maximum numbers of people. So if it would normally hold 100, the absolute maximum we could allow it in at any one time would be 50. It's the current restrictions now here in Florida. The way we do that is we move the chairs, so we're ensuring social distancing. At times, if it's a large service, then we just have to lengthen the time and let people in at a time for like a viewing, something like that. We're also doing a lot, like we're doing right now, using technology to allow people to access services or funerals. I was just joined, was another family. The mother passed away, and we had the funeral service online. So we're doing that quite often using Facebook Live or Zoom or different platforms, depending on if the family wants that to be open to the public, so anyone can pay their respects, or to have it more intimate, so they have to get a link, like join, so we can honor that according to the family's wishes. So those are the things there. Even when they're families coming in to meet one of our staff to do pre-arrangements, or family coming in to meet with the funeral director to finalize arrangements and things like that. Again, we're sanitizing the rooms. A lot of our rooms where we would meet families, we have the plastic barrier. What is it? I'm blank. The
plexiglass.
Plexiglass. That was the word. So we've got plexiglass between us. If you like them in a bank, wearing masks, and we sanitize before and after. For me and my colleagues that are helping with pre-arrangements, we're doing almost entirely online appointments where we can share our screen, go through the options the same as if we were meeting in person, complete contracts and things like that online. The funeral directors can do a DocuSign contract for things like that. So we're using technology much more than we ever were before. But the services, as far as a funeral service, memorial service, celebration of life, can go on, somewhat like planned, with minimized numbers. We're also offering to postpone that. So, a lot of people can't travel. So if someone passes away and there are travel restrictions, or they don't feel comfortable getting on an airplane these days, certainly understandable. So many families, if that's the case, where we're saying let's do the thing, let's get your loved one laid to rest, but we can have a memorial service or a celebration of life service next year sometime, or in a few months, whenever it's appropriate for your family, if you wish to do that, and we can postpone that. So some families are doing that. Other locations, I spoke to some other funeral directors in the Fort Lauderdale area, where they were doing other things, where they had a drive-by funeral service, where they had the casket actually under the portico. The cars drove by, they could sign the registry book, pay their respects, and then they could. And then one of them, they even had an FM broadcaster, so they were like an old drive-in movie where they were told what radio station to go to, and the service was broadcast over the radio. So they were parking in the parking lot in their cars and listening to the funeral service. That way, that was during the lockdown where we couldn't have any services. So it's fun to see the creativity of some of my colleagues, just trying to get around, so we can, honor people's wishes and help the families and do it make sense under the circumstances to help people celebrate their loved one.
Well, it certainly has created a need for alternative solutions to all of these issues. And interestingly enough, in my own neighborhood, we had a drive-by. A neighbor up the street had passed, and the family could, not even the whole family at this time, because this was early on in the pandemic, and the family was restricted to only having 10 people at the funeral home. And that was when our groups could only be a size of 10. And so the immediate family was there. The rest of the family could not attend. But what they did when they left the funeral home, the hearse brought the casket through the neighborhood. The neighbors were all alerted that they were coming through, so that the neighbors had a chance to wave goodbye. And this particular neighbor was always outside, always friendly, always waving. So they thought, what a lovely tribute to him if all the neighbors got outside when the progression came through. There were some cars after the funeral car, and everyone waved and said goodbye. And it was really, really touching, even though you weren't in the funeral home, you weren't at the gravesite, but it was a way to let the family know, they could see you as you go through, that you did care and you were there for them. And so that was my personal experience early on with how things have changed. So, there are ways to do what we need to do, although they're going to be different, of course, with all of this pandemic. That being said, has the pandemic in some way changed people's ideas about cremation versus actual burial? Has that ever been an issue, or are things mostly still the same with that, do you think?
Yeah, I think we've seen a shift for a while. In our industry, we've seen cremation numbers steadily grow. So the data I've seen is about, last year I heard it was about 66% of people are choosing cremation these days, and growing about at 2% a year. And that's across all faiths. I think none of the religions embrace cremation, but all allow it. And I think, individuals, it's a personal choice. Some people I speak with, cremation's out of the question. It's just not something that they're comfortable considering. And of course, we respect that and we can understand that. But we're seeing a lot of people just choosing cremation over burial for various reasons. Sometimes it's cost, and it's true that, certainly cremation is typically, can be much less than a traditional burial. Depends. So just because someone's being cremated doesn't mean they don't have a permanent place, for rest. So there are a lot of options around cremation for the final resting place. It doesn't end with just being cremated, whether that's choosing to be scattered or a permanent burial of the urn in a traditional cemetery space. But there are a huge number of options around there. So I don't know if COVID per se has affected that a great deal. I don't sense that's really altered people's choices. I think their preference towards cremation or not hasn't really changed. The only thing is, perhaps for some people, in an imminent case where perhaps they were considering burial for a loved one, that they would go for cremation simply for those restrictions currently where no one can travel. Maybe they have a burial plot somewhere where it's going to be difficult. So they might go the cremation route that wasn't really in the plan if COVID wasn't there, but maybe they've gone in that route. And perhaps, I do have a tragic case where I got a phone call from a poor woman. She was calling me from the emergency room saying that she was told her husband wasn't going to survive the day, and he had COVID. And he was only 48. So that was pretty tragic, and helped with that case. But, they hadn't made no funeral plans at that age before, hadn't really crossed their minds, much at all. So that was kind of an emergency situation, completely unexpected, and it was hard for her to even think straight. So, she went for a cremation plan simply because that was the easiest under the circumstances. She could deal with it, in that emergency situation, not have to make, decisions about where to bury him if it wasn't going to be cremated and all those sorts of things. So that, I suppose that has come into play, where if we're dealing with an emergency, then it's simpler to just think about, okay, let's get the person cremated. That's the immediate need right now, and then I can worry about if there's a permanent place, that I want him to be laid to rest or scattered or whatever. That decision isn't urgent if we're not going the burial route.
Well, a lot to consider during this pandemic time when it comes to the end of life. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back with more from Wayne Henry of Dignity Memorial in just a moment. We'll be right back.
Arden Courts is not just a place to live, it's a place to call home. Residential living combined with quality caregiving. This is the philosophy behind Arden Courts. Communities created exclusively for individuals with Alzheimer's disease and related dementia who would benefit from a safe and structured environment. For additional information about any of the unique services Arden Courts provides, call 888-478-2410 to locate a community nearest you. Inquire about our educational seminars, resource library, or support groups, or simply feel free to ask questions you may have about Alzheimer's and related dementias. At Arden Courts, we know, we understand, and we can help because memory care is all we do. Remember, call 888-478-2410 for additional information about any of the unique services Arden Courts provides. You are listening to your host, Marcia Teele, an Alzheimer's disease and dementia care expert on caregiversolutions.info. If you have a question or wish to share a story, call into the show at 888-565-1470 and talk with Marcia. Now, back to Caregiver Solutions.
I'd like to take this opportunity to thank our national sponsor, Arden Courts Memory Care Communities. Arden Courts is a leader when it comes to memory care because memory care is all they do in 55 assisted living communities. So they are a great resource for caregivers and for the person with the memory loss. Today, because you're tuning in to this program either on iHeartRadio or maybe through the website, caregiversolutions.info, they'd like to give you the opportunity to have this free book. It's called The 36-Hour Day, and it's a wonderful resource for family caregivers and those that are dealing with the challenges of caring for someone with dementia, Alzheimer's, vascular dementia, all different kinds, because it gives you lots of tips, it gives you definitions, it gives you a lot of information to help you solve those day-to-day problems. If you'd like to have this book, it's free just for the asking. All you have to do is email and request it, and that email address is delray@arden-courts.com. Again, email to Delray, D-E-L-R-A-Y, at arden-courts.com. Give them your name, your address, and telephone number. Tell them that you heard about this free offer on the Caregiver Solutions Info Show, and they'll make sure to get a book shipped to your home right away. So don't delay. If you don't have this book, I highly recommend it, and maybe even tell someone else about it if they're struggling and they don't have the book. So my special guest today is Wayne Henry, and he's the Family Services Manager with Dignity Memorial, and they obviously are here in Florida, but they service in 2,600 locations throughout the United States, Canada, and Puerto Rico. And we're talking about how this COVID-19 pandemic has changed the way that we do things when it comes to end of life and having that final goodbye and burial or cremation of our loved one, and all the different problems and different workarounds that can be solutions. So thank you again, Wayne, for being here today. You mentioned before the break about how the young woman and her young husband, age 48, had passed away from the coronavirus. Tragic story, because who would have thought at 48, right? But also the fact that at that young age, they hadn't thought about getting any kind of plans ready before, he got sick. Who would have really think about those kinds of things? Most people don't. So in that case, she had an urgent emergency situation. But there are people probably out there that are seeing what's happening, seeing that the deaths are happening to younger people. Have you seen an increase since the coronavirus with people that are calling to set up pre-need services just in case something happens to them?
Yeah, I would say, we are getting certainly more calls. I don't know. I mean, the phone's not ringing off the hook. I think, there's a daily reminder, with the news, any news snippet is going to have something about COVID, so it's a constant reminder about that. So I think, it's put that in the minds of some people, saying, just reminds us, we often forget that we're mortal. We don't like to think about it. It's in our nature. Typically, people come and see us to do their pre-arrangements after they've already lost someone else in their family, or they've been to a funeral service or a memorial service recently of someone they know. And it kind of that's typically when someone gives us a call. Their friend's husband passed away, and they're like, "Wow, she was a mess. I don't want my wife to be in that situation. I'm going to make my pre-arrangements so she doesn't have to deal with it in that way." Whether COVID has had a big change to that, yeah, it's hard to say. I can't say that we've got X number more of calls because people are scared of dying from COVID. I think that's not the case. But I often ask people, do you know the mortality rate here in South Florida? Any idea? It's 100%, the same as everywhere else. Statistically speaking, COVID is not going to be a major killer in the U.S. over any long period of time. It's just potential cause of death. But there's no way getting around it. It affects us all. We're all gonna end our lives, one day of something, and we're not guaranteed to live to old age. So there isn't that guarantee there. So that woman calling me, her husband was dying of COVID. That could easily be he had a heart attack, or he had a stroke, or there could be any number of reasons that someone could die prematurely. So we're always saying to people that it really makes a lot of sense to make your pre-arrangements ahead of time. And that doesn't mean, I was telling you before we started the show that I got a call last week from a gentleman. I don't know if I can call him a gentleman actually, but he called me and said, we're going to pull, literally, he said, we're going to pull the plug on my brother at 2 o'clock. Can I meet you at 11 o'clock to do the pre-arrangements for him? That's not what we're talking about typically when we're talking about pre-arrangements. Ideally, you would do this for yourself, decades in advance. And the people that have done that, and we are getting huge numbers of calls, actually, from COVID hits, from people who have already made their pre-arrangements, or sons or daughters of people that have already made their pre-arrangements, just saying, with COVID around, worst case scenario, something were to happen to my dad, who's in Florida, I just want to double check, what has he arranged? I want to go through his, what are the arrangements he has in place already, and I just want to, be assured, that worst case scenario, what do I do? What potentially would be left to pay? So they want to, go over what is already in place.
And that's smart.
Yeah, yeah. I think I think it's rare actually that a younger person, now that with COVID, has given me a call and saying, with COVID going around, I'm scared of getting it and dying early. I think I want to do my pre-arrangement because of COVID. I think that's pretty rare. I can think of one case early on, a bus driver. He called me and said, I'm furloughed now. It was early when they locked everything down. I'm furloughed now, but I really need to go back to work as soon as possible. And I think it's really high risk. And worst case scenario, something were to happen to me, I want to put things in place so it's not a huge burden on my wife. Can you help me put that in place? That was the one case I can think of myself that I dealt with that the cause stated for someone putting their prearrangement was fear of getting COVID.
So, Wayne, you had an experience a number of years ago where you had an example, you had the experience yourself with pre-need arrangements when it came to your grandmother, which ultimately led you to become a service provider in this industry. Tell me about that experience and how her pre-need funeral was different than some of your other relatives that you were involved in planning their funeral.
Yeah, so my grandmother, 95, passed away about 2.5 years ago, and she'd done her pre-arrangements, and I went back for the funeral all my family's back in Oregon, and it was a very different experience than anything I had experienced before in my family, and I unfortunately have had a lot of deaths in the family, including my dad passed away unexpectedly when he was only 49. So and she was the last surviving grandparent I've had. But it was very smooth. It was a celebration. She had done everything ahead of time. She was very religious, but she chose to be cremated and buried next to my grandfather. But my mom was shocked. She was like, it was so easy. My grandmother, her mother, she'd planned everything down to the last detail about what song she wanted during the service, what flowers she wanted, even down to the catering. She didn't see personally. She didn't see her death as being sad. She was ready to go. She'd lost, a lot of her family members. My grandfather had passed away I think over 30 years before her. So she was ready. And she just planned it all out, and it was just very, very different experience. And we had a celebration of life, and it was a nice gift that she gave to us. And I thought, wow, that's really rewarding. I didn't even know that was possible. And I investigated more about Dignity Memorial, what all that was, and kind of learned about. It's like, wow, that seems really, really amazing. And I was looking kind of for a career change at that time, something different. So I just contacted the local funeral home here, with Dignity Memorial, and initially was thinking, well, maybe I could help with some of the funeral services, and it'd be really rewarding to kind of help, some families. And anyway, long story short, it ended up into a full-time job that I really enjoy, and really find a lot of satisfaction in that, a lot of personal satisfaction. And some people think, how can you do that, day in and day out, talk about death and dying and all that. And actually for me, it's, I'm helping families, even if it's that imminent case or, something tragic has happened, we're doing what we can to bring them comfort. For me, helping with people with prearrangements, and it's so rewarding because I know it's going to benefit their family so much in the future. And I've done the reverse, where I've been in the funeral home with the funeral director, meeting with the family who haven't made their prearrangements. And it's always pretty tragic, and it's a completely different experience. And that's that experience I had before my grandmother, where they've just lost someone. They're having to decide, what they would have wanted, what's best choice to do, what. And and unfortunately pay the highest possible price. So, what we're saying to people is there's a better way. Do your own prearrangements. It can be a celebration. It can be, whatever you want, whether it's something very simple up to something more elaborate, like a full celebration of life. Baby boomers love the idea. They get to decide what's right for them. They can. We've had. I've seen them in a barbecue. It can really be, unique to that person. There was one that we helped with in Delray Beach here that the gentleman was loved his Harley Davidson. So we brought his Harley Davidson into the funeral home, and we had a celebration of life, motorcycle themed. His favorite food, and we had his grandkids running around, and it was definitely, it felt like more like a party than it certainly wasn't a funeral. So the celebration, and that's how he wanted to be remembered, and that's what it can be, rather than a sad occasion. Of course, you're going to be sad, you've lost someone, but it's really about celebrating that person, remembering the good times, remembering what they've did in their life, what they've achieved, and just really, just paying your respect to that person. It's what it's all about, and that brings me a lot of satisfaction and a lot of joy in what I do.
Well, I totally can relate to that, understanding how you feel good about providing a great service to people and helping people in their time of need. And I can relate to that, helping families dealing with Alzheimer's and dementia in their lives for the last 20 years. So it is a good feeling when you know that you can help someone get through those tough times. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with more.
Arden Courts is not just a place to live. It's a place to call home. Residential living combined with quality caregiving. This is the philosophy behind Arden Courts. Communities created exclusively for individuals with Alzheimer's disease and related dementia who would benefit from a safe and structured environment. For additional information about any of the unique services Arden Courts provides, call 888-478-2410 to locate a community nearest you. Inquire about our educational seminars, resource library, or support groups, or simply feel free to ask questions you may have about Alzheimer's and related dementias. At Arden Courts, we know, we understand, and we can help because memory care is all we do. Remember, call 888-478-2410 for additional information about any of the unique services Arden Courts provides. You are listening to your host, Marcia Teele, an Alzheimer's disease and dementia care expert on caregiversolutions.info. If you have a question or wish to share a story, call into the show at 888-565-1470 and talk with Marcia. Now, back to Caregiver Solutions.
I'm talking today to Wayne Henry. He's the Family Services Manager with Dignity Memorial Southeast Florida, and we're talking about all things related to the memorial, celebration of life, to cremation, to burial amongst the pandemic that we're going through. And Wayne, right before commercial break, you mentioned one of the benefits to pre-need arrangements, especially like with your grandmother had, was that it was easy because she had made all those tough decisions ahead of time and nobody had to kind of second guess what she would have wanted. But there's a couple other benefits to making your arrangements long before you need them. I just want to mention those real quick. So besides the ease of it and not having to, make those tough decisions, what are some of the other benefits of pre-need arrangements?
Yeah, so finances is the main one. But when we speak to our families, their motivation for putting their pre-arrangements in place is more for the emotional benefit that they're giving to their family, because they know, like my mom, she dealt with it. She hardly had to do anything. It was already planned. Everything, all of the details were there, and my mom, she didn't have to pay a penny. It was all done. So that made it so much easier for us, where we could concentrate 100% on being with each other, concentrating on remembering my grandmother. So that's huge. But if you want to save some money, do it ahead of time. And we're seeing that now where, we have a lot of people who did their pre-arrangements, 30 years ago, who are passing away now. And a lot of those calls I've been getting with COVID, saying, oh, I want to check on my dad's pre-arrangements. Can you pull up his file and go through that with me? It's like, all right, first thing, you need to thank your father before he passes away. Because he paid next to nothing in 1995 when he did this, or 1990, compared to what you would have paid if he had not done this and it was your responsibility. So please thank him. And this is what he's arranged. This is what he wanted. And pretty much there's nothing for you to pay, or there could be some minor charges. That's huge. So not only can you decide exactly what you want, and again, we can do something from, elaborate, but it depends. So some people, depending on their faith, what's important to them, what's normal for their family, might want something more traditional. And we can certainly do that. And we cater to any faith. Some of our locations specialize in specific, arrangements for specific faiths. So some of them, for example, are predominantly Jewish funeral home. So, we can do the traditional tahara washing of the body under the Jewish faith. We bring in the Havra Kaddish societies to come and do that. We can provide the shomer, so we can do things that are typically what Jewish families would expect. But at those locations, we also service non-Jewish families. We can do that. It's no problem. Others more Catholic. We even have Muslim or Hindu or whatever the faith. So some people want to have a viewing of the body, for example. That's what they would do. So we would do the embalming of the body. We have the time slots to do the viewings, and we have some people want a funeral service. So whatever you want, you can put that in place. You can lock in the price. Yeah, so whatever you want, and we can help, and you can. Some people want to put as much as possible in their pre-arrangement. So 20 death certificates, or money for catering, money for flowers. They want to put as much as possible on there, so their family has as little to pay as possible. We can pretty much we do lock in all of the prices for all of our merchandises and services that we're providing. So caskets, purse, everything that we're providing, we lock in at the time of doing the pre-arrangement. So those prices can never go up in the future for the family. Things like death certificates, money towards clergy, food, obviously we can't lock in those prices. Those are the only things that possibly could go up in price. But people can put money on their pre-arrangement so that cash is there for us to pay out to those third-party services. And then if those costs have gone up a bit, then they just need to pay the difference rather than the whole amount. So some people want to put as much as possible on there so the family have as little as possible. Others like, well, let's do the basics. So at least, if something were to happen to me prematurely, then my family doesn't have to, decide who to call. And, if I wanted burial or cremation, at least we can get the basics in place, and then they can decide if they want to have flowers and food and how many death certificates they want. They can deal with that much at least. So, we can cater to whatever, the person feels is right.
Right.
And we can put payment plans for 10 years. And we offer it with or without payment protection, which basically that is. Payment protection is basically a term life insurance policy we can have on place. So it maybe, we've gone for a elaborate celebration of life with everything on there, and it's $12,000, for example. That's much more than average, but let's say $12,000. They can do with that payment protection. Maybe they're paying, depending if they're doing a 3, 5, or 10-year plan, maybe they're paying $200 a month. So they start paying that for that payment plan. If something happens to them prematurely before that's paid off, rather than leaving the balance for their family to pay, that insurance covers the balance. So even if they've only paid 2 or 3 payments on their payment plan and they got hit by a bus, rather than the family having to cough up, $11,600, they don't have anything to pay because that insurance is in place. So we have those different payment options as well.
Well, there's certainly lots of reasons to think about doing pre-arrangement besides it being easy. The emotional toll is lessened, it's less time, it's less costly, lots of reasons. Unfortunately, we only have a couple minutes left with you. The time has gone by so fast, Wayne. If someone has questions and they'd like to ask more, how can they get in touch with you? Do you have a website they should look at or Facebook page?
Yeah, so certainly, I encourage everyone to learn more about Dignity Memorial, our mother company. It's just dignitymemorial.com. There's a lot of resources on our website about, the average costs for a burial versus cremation. How do you write an obituary? There's a huge number of resources there. There's also, you can have a look on there and find a funeral home or cemetery in the area. It's quite user-friendly. If you want to look at more in our area here, from West Palm Beach down to Miami, go on Facebook, facebook.com/Dignity Memorial Southeast Florida, SE Florida, and you'll see a lot more of the local activities, seminars, other events, discounts, and things that we're providing in the local level. A few things I'd like to mention: we're having a lot of things happening this month. So we're actually having several free online dinner seminar coming up in August with various topics. Our first one is this coming Thursday at 6 o'clock, and it's talking about the various cemetery options in Southeast Florida, from the traditional to cremation, scattering gardens, other options including our Neptune Memorial Reef, which if you haven't heard of that, I encourage you to check that out. We will be providing all of that information on Thursday. So you just join online. It's actually on Zoom webinar. So you can see the presentation. You can ask some questions, but then we ask you to kind of meet with us online afterwards. We set an appointment. And then we go through the different options for you to consider, or you can schedule a tour of one of our cemeteries if you want. They just meet us afterwards individually with me or one of my colleagues, and we'll actually have a meal or for anyone that joins us. So if the couple will have 2 meals delivered right to your home. So we can do that.
Well,
and we have
our time
other.
is up. We've got the music going. Our time is up. But
look on Facebook.
Get
You
your
can
cell
also
phone number. I know
text.
you want to give.
Yeah, text me 561-654-9000, and I'll send a link to all our upcoming events and discounts and activities.
Okay. Well, thank you, Wayne. It's been a pleasure talking with you. Stay safe during the pandemic, and thank you.
Yeah, you too, and everyone else.
Yeah, thank you so much for all the great information. Thank you to the viewers and listeners for tuning in. If you want to talk to Wayne, text him at 561-654-9000. Tell him you saw him on the Caregiver Solution Info Show. And we'll be back next Tuesday at 6 p.m. with another wonderful program. Bye for now.
Thanks for joining us for this week's Caregiver Solutions with Marcia Teele. Join us next week as Marcia, who has 15 years of Alzheimer's disease and dementia care experience, brings you more needed information to help with the care of your loved one. This show can be seen again on caregiversolutions.info, and questions can be left on the site, which may be used on the program to help others. See you next week for more